bringing some fake woman because their spouse would not consent and saying, she's here and she doesn't have, she's not literate, so she's just going to like stamp her finger. And then you see like the person would be like, hey, what are you doing? What's happening? And they don't really look like they belong together, and you know that this is fake, and she's probably been paid like a few, however much money to come in and give her signature. But that is not allowed. Your wife has to come in and officially sign and give consent for you to do this. You can't have a family member in dialysis. So if you have a family member who's on dialysis, you're not allowed to go and sell your kidney to a stranger. You're supposed to. This is a way to encourage people that if you have someone within your own family, you're supposed to donate to them.
What if they're not a match?
Yeah.
What if he doesn't, another match with their relative was on?
Then I'm sure they could make a case that they can do this. Yeah. Yeah. I couldn't donate to this person because I'm not a match, so it doesn't make a difference. Yeah. The point is that if you can donate to someone who's a family member, you are a match for your son, then you're not supposed to go and sell it to somebody else. Donor must undergo lab exams to determine general and organ health. The transplantation takes place in public hospitals, and the transplantation, the costs are covered by the state. 1 million tomans. So out of the amount of money that is paid to the organ seller, the donor, 1 million of that for the past, since 1997, almost 2 decades, 1 million tomans of that, which now is equivalent to several $100s, is paid by the state. The rest of that, it is expected that the recipient will pay the donor. And that amount every year is set by the KPF. And it increases largely based on inflation. So I have heard cases of it starting off around 300,000 tomans to, I believe, 2 years ago, it was around 8 or 9 million, and I assume that it's quite possible that it might be around 10 to 12 million now.
How much is that in dollars?
Less than $5,000. So it's not a lot of money at all. Even by Iranian currency, that's not a lot of money at all. So it's an amount that it will not impoverish you to cover that cost. Even poor people can somehow put together that money to buy that organ. Additional payment is often exchanged. So even though they say that it shouldn't happen, some centers try to kind of regulate that and not allow people to exchange money after that. But in most centers, they understand that that might even be necessary. So it's possible that the person will either afterwards or before the surgery say that, okay, this amount of money will be exchanged through the KPF. That means the patient will give that money to the KPF. The KPF will then give it to the patient, to the donor. But then they also agree on another amount, a set amount to be exchanged after or before the transplantation on their own. The donor receives 1 year of free health insurance, and unfortunately they don't often take advantage of that. And they will be given top priority in receiving an organ if they need it. So if they end up with organ failure themselves later on, then they are put on top of the waiting list. Yes?
There's no anonymity, the word I'm trying to say.
Anonymity?
At all, or is there?
And people beat each other.
So
and I would say that is a good thing. That the social relationship that is created between them, I would say, is fundamental and just crucial to this being at least kind of ethical. Yeah.
Just general, because the donor deny wanting to accept payment.
Okay. And that happens a lot. It happens a lot where I want to sell my kidney. I say I don't have any money to pay for the lab test, and according to this policy, you have to pay the cost of the lab test yourself as a person who wants to sell. But you find someone who's desperate enough and who's willing to cover those fees for you because you don't have enough money, you're desperate for money, you don't have a few $100,000 a month to spend on this. They say, okay, fine, I'll pay your lab fees. I'll go with you, we'll go have all of these tests performed. They go through the entire process, and they even set a date for transplantation, and the day before the transplantation at times, the person all of a sudden decides, maybe they get cold feet, maybe they decide it's not for them. All kinds of reasons, they just opt out, and you cannot force anybody to undergo the transplantation. And unfortunately for the patient, they will say, well, I just lost all of that money and all that time, all that money to cover that person's fees for the lab tests, and also, going through the mental process of preparing for this transplantation, and it falls through.
money is being spent on avoiding the irregularities around selling kidneys and
How much money? I don't know.
whether it's spending money.
There's a lot of money in, I'm sorry?
They're paying for the medical costs and things like that to prevent the irregularities and then.
So there's all kinds
become a
of, there's,
business.
well, it's not a business. It absolutely is not a business.
Just they're trying to prevent it, actually.
So if a medical doctor himself tries to facilitate the process, if any amount of money is exchanged in addition, if they are independently paid by the people who are being transplanted on, they would lose their medical license. In fact, that entire hospital will be under scrutiny and they will be in deep trouble. That does not mean that it absolutely cannot happen, but it isn't very easy. It isn't very easy to happen at all. So medical doctors don't really have a huge advantage or interest in these transplantations happening necessarily, besides the fact that many of them are convinced that this is the best solution, because dialysis, a lot of our devices are outdated, we have a lot of patients that are really overwhelming the system, and there's all kinds of reasons why surgery is oftentimes seen in Iran as the most optimal and efficient kind of medical intervention. No matter, I mean, your wrist hurts, let's operate on it. I mean, no matter what your problem is, the solution is oftentimes extreme intervention, invasive intervention.
Why is the incidence of kidney failure so high?
For most developing countries, the issue is the rise of diabetes and hypertension. So stress, changing eating habits, fast food, stress again,
Preventive care.
preventive. Lack of knowledge, I came across a lot of people who ended up on dialysis merely because they were popping like 20 painkillers a day because of a headache that was because of high blood pressure, and they could not be bothered to go and see a doctor. They just took these pills and then, or from something as simple as an infection, like a simple bladder infection that would not be treated soon enough, that would end up in kidney failure. So a lot of cases of just lack of information, lack of knowledge. What happened here? Just went to sleep. Oh,
When is the
so
money?
fast.
When is the money exchanged? At what point?
The money the person has, it's the patient will give that money to the Kidney Patient Foundation, that's that amount. And that set amount is given to them after the transplantation. And the 1 million tamans that they collect from the state, they actually have to go through certain bureaucratic procedures to get that, and it can be a pain for people. And for that reason, sometimes people will negotiate that, I want at least some of this amount to be paid to me, like the night before the surgery, or, the morning of the surgery, please transfer some of this money to my husband, and things like that will happen. So the donor profile, the paid donor profile, usually they're in their 20s. So a lot of people in their 30s, but usually they're in their early 20s. They're people who need immediate cash. And surprisingly, especially in Tehran, to my surprise, these are not the poorest of the poor. I was shocked. And I sat for several years for days in the office, the social worker's office, where people would come and talk to the social worker to discuss their interest in wanting to sell their kidney. And I was really surprised with the people who walked in, dressed the way that they were dressed, wearing the designer clothes that they were wearing. And some people who were highly educated, 24-year-old kid who was so smart that he had finished at one of the top universities, Shia University in Iran, had received, before finishing his engineering degree, was so intelligent, that was recruited by a company to work for them. Figured that, why work for a company? Why not start my own company and make a lot of money? Was very young, made some very poor business choices, lost a lot of his investments. So went from being very rich, getting married, living a lofty life, to all of a sudden losing all of his assets due to bad, poor investments. And all of a sudden he's left with nothing, and a young wife who's used to a very lavish lifestyle says, now I can't travel, now I can't do anything. And a kid, literally a 24-year-old kid, who's too embarrassed to go to his parents, who has experienced a lifestyle that's been comfortable and now feels like he does not know what to do. And this is an invisible way of obtaining quick cash. And I spent hours trying to dissuade him from doing this. And I think that he did not end up selling his kidney. But really, he needed counseling. He needed family counseling. And there were a lot of cases of that. There were also a lot of cases of people who wanted to relieve debt, so they failed business ventures. Extremely, extremely common amongst that population, especially in Iran. People who migrate from smaller towns, leave their family behind, go to the big city, don't know how to navigate this very difficult atmosphere, make poor investment choices, are very young, lose that money, don't know what to do. And now they have all these bad checks. And in Iran, sadly, you cannot just file bankruptcy and start with non-existing credit, start all over again as you can in the U.S. There's debtor's prison, so you will actually end up in prison if you have those 10 people coming after you and you can't pay them back. So these are people who are oftentimes motivated to find a quick way of obtaining cash. I even saw a person who, in order to convince people he owes money to convince them that he was actually serious about paying them back, to get a form from the KPF, from the Kidney Patient Foundation, saying that this person is interested in selling his organ, even though he wasn't, just so that he could take this to them and say, just give me more time. I am so desperate that I'm willing to sell my kidney. Can you just give me more time and I will give your money back to you? So there's, that dynamic too. Yes?
There are some really fascinating structural parallels with paid surrogate motherhood. And that would be a great project for you. And I think what we see so far is something similar with the women who volunteer to do that, which is, although there was a lot of concern about vulnerability and exploitation, it is not the poorest of the poor to do it.
Yep. People who donate their eggs, a lot of college kids who are donating their eggs. Yes.
I was just wondering if we could equate the jurists in the defense of the jurists, just like the DEA and the FDA approved narcotics in this country, and then we are dealing with the abuse of prescription abuse or the narcotic abuse on the streets and all that. So there are two separate things. So most of the time the comments that I've been hearing is about how the jurists think about it. So jurists were in their own right, thinking something, different. While the abuse of the problem, or we can call it the side effect of the medication, is totally different. So that's what I was thinking while you were presenting. So that was in defense of the jurists who approved this. But at the same time, people can abuse anything.
Yeah.
It's not that simple.
No, I think that the problem is that there hasn't been a structured study to say that when something like this becomes a policy, so we're not talking about just an individual case, so this is permissible in an abstractly, in a desert where there is no society. I mean, that is literally the explanation that they gave me. Imagine that you are somewhere with no society. When you're thinking of a primary ordinance, that's what you're thinking of when you say that. There's nobody there, there's no society, there's no other kind of interest involved, and I'm saying, is this permissible? I give you a kidney, you give me money, is this a sin? Is this permissible or not? All the other stuff about what is the intention, what kind of psychological effect can this have, all of this would be secondary issues that are important, that are relevant, they have to be considered. But right now, I don't have a study telling me that this is wrong. We don't have the system that exists in Bangladesh and in a lot of other places. That's not what we have, and that is what the supporters of the system would say to you. Is there a study that says that what is happening in Iran is unethical and that if the jurists go ahead and ban this, we will have a superior system? As far as I know, I'm the only person who's done this kind of anthropological work on this, and I'm not willing to say something like that. Even though, as someone who might be providing commentary on the making of this fatwa, I would agree that there are major blind spots. There are major blind spots that affect the making of this fatwa that we have to be cognizant of when we think of how any fatwa within any school of thought, any community is made. What are the various kind of factors that are involved? What are the different stakes that are involved? The different institutions that have their own biases and interests that are put in that that affect them. It doesn't mean that I would necessarily think that now a ban on this in the Iranian case will necessarily result in. But would I say that now we need to implement this everywhere in the world? How? I don't know. And that's something that I want to kind of open up here, is that it's the way that this has been, presented is kind of this kind of a gift, commodification, bifurcation, this kind of dichotomy that I want to problematize. Okay. Yes.
It's a comment.
Yes.
I think what she's trying to say is that is this system perfect? By no means, but at the same time, it's much better than, like in other countries, kind of like back alley organ trafficking. She's not by me saying like this is awesome, it's amazing. There's no fault in this. No, but at the same time, you got to understand that it's like kind of like government sponsored. At the same time, if it were kind of like shut down, then people would still kind of find a way to maybe kind of like still do it. But I mean, is any system going to be perfect? No, but it is what it is.
I'm actually even a bit more cautious than that. I'm not even necessarily saying that. Saying that, as an anthropologist, I'm not here to make the statement that this is either great or this is wrong, it should be happening, it should not be happening. I'm trying to understand a phenomenon and trying to understand what are the different factors at play. Kind of do a social archaeology of this, kind of untangle all the different threads that are being woven together to make this what it is, and say that now for all those people who are bioethicists, for those people like Dr. Padella, who have interest in advocating a particular model, they can then use this information and hopefully be informed sufficiently to make the right decisions when they study a case like the Iranian model for living unrelated kidney donation. I'm not necessarily trying to say that this is good or bad. I want to express that there are blind spots, and there's books that can be written about the blind spots in the making of fatwas in the Iranian context. But in this presentation, when I talk about how people themselves make sense and talk about this exchange, I would say that it's also not as simple as the kind of the framing that exists in the Western kind of bioethics discussions on the commodification of the body. And we have very little time, and I'm going to very briefly go over this.
Previous slide.
Yes.
The recipient profile.
So recipient profile, they're often of the same socioeconomic background as the donor. So the story of rich people are buying organs from poor people, it does happen that there are some wealthy people who will buy organs, but a large number, probably, I don't have the actual data right now, but there hasn't been a study on this, and I think it's more than 50% of the people who are receiving organs themselves are fairly poor, lower middle class people. And they may actually use charity funds to cover payments to donors. So it's very common for people to come into the Kidney Patient Foundation and say, my father passed away, he was a very pious man, he wanted his money to be spent in a good way, and what we want to do is we want to offer this amount of money for the organization to give people who want to buy kidneys. Rarely do people say, I want to give this money to people who want to sell their kidneys so that they don't sell their kidneys. It's, I want to give this money, and see, this is a part of the reason why you even get those fatwas, is because there is no discussion about organ donors in Iran. There's really very little talk about organ donors. So the greater thing to do would be to help someone live a better life, a poor person who will die if they don't receive an organ, to try to facilitate that process for them, ease their burden, to cover their costs of medication, other treatments that may be necessary, and a part of those costs are the costs of having to pay for someone to give them their organ. Did you have a question? Yes, sorry.
Does the exploitation of the poor by the world not happen because the richest leave the country to seek care elsewhere?
I'm not saying that rich people are not buying organs. Now, would I call it exploitation? I would say we have to be very careful about whether that is exploitative or not. But yes, of course, the wealthy people are, and they have no reason to leave Iran. Iran, I think, ranks like number one in the Middle East when it comes to transplantation. 4 in the world. We have top-notch centers. And if you're very wealthy, you don't want this done in a public university, a hospital, then you'll go to a private institution, pay more money, and get top-notch service. I have friends who received 1 kidney in the United States, and the organ was eventually rejected, then went to Iran and had their second transplantation done there.
Are there any instances of organ stealing as well?
See,
By the medical community?
a lot of doctors in this room.
It
How
happens.
possible is it?
It happens. And a lot of third world countries,
It happened
the
in
How,
medical-
how
the
possible is
medical-
it for you to like kidnap somebody, put
No, no,
him in a tub somewhere? These were rumors that we heard as children.
It happened in the movies.
The patient comes with some problem and they do the surgery and then steal the kidney.
Sure,
And that happens.
that can happen,
Yes,
right?
that's
That-
what I'm talking about.
Right.
And that has happened many times, and especially in the third world countries and the countries that you mentioned, Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, and other countries. These are the three countries that I know of.
Exactly.
You know?
The story that is often told is that be careful as kids, don't get kidnapped because one day you're going to end up in a tub somewhere and you're going to be like, ooh, I missed a story with my kidney and there's a helicopter taking your kidney to some... That can't happen. And there's stories to this day in Iranian newspapers about women who go change in these changing rooms in these clothing shops, and then there's an elevator that takes them down to a basement, and they're going, oh, women, be careful, don't go to these stores on here. It can't happen. But that can happen. Never have I heard of a single case. And I would say, what would be the motivation for that when you have so many donors? Why would a doctor be motivated to do something like that? To remove an organ from a person that may have not properly been tested, someone you don't know, you just don't have enough knowledge, and you have to do it under circumstances that are, medically even speaking, are not optimal. So why would you do that when you don't really have that much of a dearth of people who can properly go in, have their tests done, do all the kinds of tests on their kidneys and their general health, have a relationship with the person who's receiving the kidney? Why would a patient opt for the doctor to do that?
Well, the
When they
patient
can
doesn't
find
know.
the
The patient doesn't know, and the recipient
Sure,
doesn't know.
but why would the
And
doctor want to do that?
And the doctor is criminal, basically. You
But
know.
why would the doctor? No, but why would he want to do that? So sure, that only can happen if it's illegal for you to purchase it.
Trafficking.
Sure, but different than who?
So hold,
Make
we're
it
talking about the
more
Iran.
honest.
I
I'm talking
think
about Iran.
yeah, we should let
In Iran, why would there be no?
Yeah,
But that's
have
what
to
I'm
let
asking, you
Iran.
know, like that. So that is a good thing. That's what my point was. By regulating it, they have like stopped this thing.
Right.
While in countries which they are not regulating, and so but this is what is happening where there is no regulation. So that was my point.
Right. So sorry for misunderstanding
Yeah.
that. You're exactly right. So in the case of Iran, I've never heard of something like that happening because they've removed the incentive for that.
Exactly.
The cost of dialysis is entirely borne by the public. Is that?
Yes.
Okay, probably, because I don't remember.
Formally speaking,
I don't think,
officially speaking.
I don't think it is in news that Iran has more population, more ESRD patients than other places, percentage-wise. So the only motivation for this kind of push for transplant and donation and stuff like that is because the government bears the burden of dialysis patients.
I think in a lot of countries, the government bears that burden. Do they
Not
not in
in
Saudi Arabia?
I don't know about that, but.
They do, because I know that even
But
if an
none of
Iranian
them-
goes to Hajj, they could receive free dialysis in Saudi Arabia. I think there are many
UK,
governments.
No, I'm talking about those countries where you have, selling of organs.
Yeah.
You haven't mentioned anything about xenograft
Yeah.
in Iran. Is it famous?
I haven't done research on that. I don't think that it actually happens because I won't say anything because I can conjecture, but I haven't done any research on that, and I haven't heard of it happening. I mean, it will be technically discussed in the legal discussions, and that perhaps that is preferable to receiving an organ from a living Muslim, but I haven't seen it as an actual practical discussion of medical doctors pushing for something like that. So often the patient prefers living donor because they believe that the outcome will be better. A lot of people that I talk to say that I won't even consider getting an organ from a brain dead person because, oh, well, that person's probably been in an accident and God knows what they've been through and it can't be good quality. Whereas if they can see the person, if they can see that healthy, good-looking male, and a lot of people hear from their doctors, you want someone that's not too overweight, someone that's not too frail and skinny, an average young man, healthy, athletic, then they will trust that body and that organ more. And there's also a lot of people who will not even consider organ buying and will from the very beginning put themselves on a brain death list. Oftentimes the motivation for that is that it'll be free. so they won't have to spend any money for that.
So people pay family members, or is that not?
That would be
And
illegal.
what is the waiting time for that over there?
For, people, it's oftentimes said that there is no waiting list in Iran and model that you could receive an organ from a living person without a.
But it is.
It would depend on the center. It would, because hospitals independently facilitate this. There isn't yet developed a strong enough network among the different hospitals. Say that one hospital in Tehran has a patient that needs an organ. Another hospital in south of Tehran now just has a patient who's brain dead. They can immediately do this transplantation. It rarely happens for all kinds of reasons. So it really depends on how many brain death cases do we have in this particular institution and how many patients and a team, a group of staff who are equipped to provide the counseling and the persuasive kind of tactics to get that family to donate. So it's very difficult to say that this is generally the waiting time. It could be immediate. It could be very fast. If you're lucky, it could be right away. It could also be you're there for 2 years, 3 years, 10 years, or you have to go to Tehran for this to happen. So very quickly, when in the discussions that we have on either agreeing, promoting the idea of organ sales, mostly it's the economists who try to push forth this kind of a model, and those people who are against it, oftentimes anthropologists, also a lot of medical doctors, there is this gifting versus commodification dichotomy that the body should not be commodified, that under the model of neoliberal economics is to turn everything that exists and does not even materially exist into a commodity that can within a market be exchanged, and that this should not happen to the human body. I have a list of cases where it is permissible to receive financial gain: semen donation, egg sales, plasma, hair. Surrogacy, clinical trials are not very different. You're putting your body in harm's way to receive money. Some would say, no, this is, let's say the U.S. Risky jobs, stuntmen, commercial divers, transmission tower climbers. These are people who oftentimes get paid more because they're putting their bodies. There's a risk. Third parties in the U.S. make lots of profit from exchanging skin, heart, bones, cornea, lungs, kidneys. Even though donors cannot legally receive money, those organizations that are responsible for packaging and sending them off and to various facilities profit immensely from this. So those people who agree with this would say that, well, the body is already commodified. And look at this list I just gave you. Semen is being sold, hair is being sold, we have surrogates and so on, stuntmen. If it's already commodified, then what's the big deal? What makes the kidney different from, let's say, an egg? Right? Aren't you saying that you want to promote people, you want to advocate for people donating? So doesn't that mean that donation is harmless? Hopefully you're not advocating for people to do something that's harmful. Then if it's harmless, then how is it any different from egg donation?
You mean in Iran?
No, I'm talking in general, the Western bioethical discussions around this issue. Then I want to look at Iran as a case that kind of problematizes this, that kind of challenges it and says, well, maybe we need to look at some other things besides gift versus commodity. The opponents would say legalizing organ selling will exploit the poor. It will reduce altruistic donation. People will not be motivated to ask their family members to altruistically donate when they can buy it from someone. They would say it's unjust, that the health of the wealthy who can afford it are preserved at the expense of the poor, and that bodies are fundamentally sacred things that should not be commodified, and this is something that is universal. Proponents would say, well, it will resolve the organ shortage problem, it will save lives. They would say that to deny kidney donors payment is unjust. The doctor is getting paid, this person is receiving a kidney and receiving better quality of life. The hospital is receiving money. These institutions that are matching organs, they're all getting money. Now, the one person who's making the greatest sacrifice, you're saying that it's a criminal act for this person to receive money. That's unfair. And they would say that individuals have the right to choose. This is based on the rational choice theory that is very common these days, the basis of a lot of neoclassical economics, that individuals are free agents to make their own decisions, and that people, well, all these individuals will always make the best decision for them, regardless of what matters to them, if it's a matter of sitting or not sitting, helping someone, relieving their financial burdens. Regardless of what matters to them, they will always weigh the pros and the cons, and they will try to maximize utility and make the decision for them. So for you, for the state to come in and prohibit this is paternalistic. You are trying to make a decision. Why do you think the poor cannot make decisions for themselves? If they want to do it, if their circumstances are somehow going to be improved, then who am I to say that this is a criminal act and should be prohibited?
Can I just make a quick
Yeah.
point on that? So,
Yeah.
just to point
My
out.
baby's gone. He's silent, so we have all the time in the world.
He's outside. I told him to go outside.
Really? Okay. All right.
Just on the issue of consent, so there's a very interesting piece on physician-assisted suicide, and the argument is that we should legalize physician-assisted suicide because it promotes autonomy. But there's a very interesting article on this, saying that autonomy in and of itself should not be a reason why we make something what's normally illegal without first analysing whether that's what it's right or wrong to do first. So, as a starting point, to make something illegal, what's illegal legal, because it promotes autonomy, I think is not in itself the strong justification.
And I would say that that is what most agree with for the time being, and that is why ordinance are not permitted. So just presenting the different perspectives here. I'm not an advocate for one or the other.
It's just
But that is a very important comparison. Very relevant to this case. So what's wrong? What happens when people exchange? What about commodities? What happens with commodity exchange is that you attempt an equivalence. You say that I am going to give this to you, and you say I'll give you $2 for that. And once this transaction occurs, the assumption is that the value of this is $2, right? So I am attempting equivalence between that which I was given and that which that I am giving. It's a calculating relationship. It's an impersonal relationship. When I go to a Walgreens and I want to buy medicine, I don't really care about the person who's selling this item to me. I don't really even know who's selling it to me. I buy it. It's an impersonal relationship. I give them money. They give me the product. It, in a way, impedes and ends social relationships. So if I want to offer something to you, and I'm hoping to create a relationship with you, a kind relationship, I say, hey, you can have my lunch. The moment you say, hey, sure, I'll give you $5 for that, you are impeding that kind of altruistic, friendly relationship that I was trying to create with you. It doesn't result in reciprocation. And the purpose is usually to increase profits, and it results in the alienation of things. And very simplistically, I would have to say, it cuts off the relationship that we as producers and consumers have to that object. Way oversimplification at this point. I'm not going to get into discussions with Marx in the next 5 minutes. So, gift exchange. It does not attempt exact quantitative equivalence. I give you something for your birthday. You give me something, hopefully not much more expensive, hopefully not way less expensive, but we don't attempt an equivalence, right? Social relationships are created. Reciprocation is imperative. And the purpose is to create social relationships, not profit. And those things are inalienated, meaning that I will have an affective relationship to that bag that you bought from the store and you gave me for my birthday because you gave it to me. You didn't just buy it and send it over and say, oh, I think you like to have it, whatever, or I'm paying you, you're giving it to me. But you gave it to me as a gift. I have a relationship. I see a connection between that thing and you, the person who gave it to me. So what happens? In the Iranian case, are people selling? Do we have a case of commodification? Or are people gifting their organs and being money gifted back? These are some advertisements illicit advertisements that people have written on the walls. Advertising their kidneys. Up here you have this person actually made the effort of printing out flyers and posting them multiple places around hospitals and the Communication Foundation. So with all of the experiments done with the phone number. And again, these are handwritten illicit advertisements. These advertisements are not permitted, and the KPF will constantly try to cover these, paint over them. but there's thousands of them. It's very
So how would that work? So someone just off the street would call that person, and then how would they do the?
I would say that you see all these scribbles. These are all people's attempts at taking the matter into their own hands and removing the KPF from the process. But for the most part, they all fail.
That's what I was gonna say. Like, is there like the underground hospital that like does
it fails. They fail. Caricature that I'm not going to have time to go into. So when it comes to the moral landscape, how people think about this. On the top, donating altruistically with no payment is considered to be the most moral, the most ethical kind of sacrifice you have to make to save somebody else's life. After that, it's for you to agree to donate your organ after death. I mean, it's not that difficult. If I'm dead, what difference does it make, right? So it's not going to be superior to giving altruistic donation, but it's definitely pretty high up there. Next to that is donating to save someone's life and expecting just enough payment to resolve their own problems without undue pressure on the recipient, without wanting to make a profit. And the lowest of the low is selling your organ at a large sum to make a substantial profit. And so something that I found that I'm discussing in the chapter that I'm writing right now is kind of the dynamic between these last two. Is that people, when you talk to the general public, when you talk to people who sold kidneys, people who bought kidneys, they were very quick to tell you that, sure, money is being exchanged, but that money is not actually the price of the organ. It's not the price. It's not selling. I mean, sure, they would even say, I'm selling, I mean, donating, I'm donating, I mean, selling. They would go back and forth. Even doctors go back and forth. Even the jurists go back and forth between the language of donating and selling. Most people would say, sure, I mean, they're paying money, but this isn't actually selling. You would say, well, why is this not actually selling? Because they would say there's no equivalence being made. The value of the kidney is saving someone's life is so great that no amount of money that I give you could really be a fair compensation. And as of now, the amount that people are getting compensated is really not that much. So could you really purely, some would say purely be motivated by money? But even if you are, the amount that you're getting is so little that surely God will still be blessing you. Like you will be accruing so much blessing from God that will compensate kind of the inadequacy or the lack, right, between this infinite value in saving somebody's life and the several $1,000s that I'm going to pay you. The rest will be the sabab, the blessings that you will get from that. And this is something that people who donated, people who were observers, family members, and people who received organs would emphasize. I'm going to skip over this ad, and I want to just for a few minutes go over pretty much most of what I have. If we can just go over this brief, a brief version of a long interview with a person 2 years after selling his organ. Majid, 2 years after selling his organ. So he was 20 years old at the time. He was married. He owned a small clothing shop for 6 years, and he fell into addiction. He lost all of his wealth. He ended up having to take high-interest loans that he could not pay back. Because of this, he lost his credibility. He couldn't really then ask for loans to pay back his debts. He ended up having to move in with his mother-in-law, and at one point reached a stage where he said, I was one with the dirt. I had nothing left. I did not even possess a single utensil, a single fork that I could say is mine. I had nothing. And he was very close to getting divorced. Wife was very loyal, stayed with him. He decided to sell his kidney for $6 million at the time to start his life over. But as he starts this process of having the lab test done, going to the KPF, this process takes a few months. And the more serious he gets about this process, the family members start stepping in. The mother-in-law steps in, the father-in-law steps in, and they try to dissuade him. They say, look, we will find a job for you. A friend steps in and says, look, I'll find a job for you. Family members say, well, we'll try to do something so that you don't have to sell your kidney. So what happens is that he actually ends up getting a job. He says, since I had been working, so he ends up getting a job after he is matched with a 30-year-old nuclear scientist. So this very sick young guy, nuclear scientist, he gets matched with him. And as they're going through the process, after having met this person, he's almost getting dissuaded to sell his kidney. He said, since I had been working for 4 to 5 months, a lot of people were dissuading me from doing this. My mother-in-law, my father-in-law, all sat around and tried to convince me not to do this. I was persuaded not to sell. But then the issue of money went away, and there was this feeling. How can I say this? Sometimes a feeling of humanitarianism in Sandusi is awakened in you. That young man was about my own age. His kidneys were failing, and apparently dialysis wasn't working for him. I mean, I had changed my mind to sell. I had a job. But then that feeling was awakened. That man was just like me, so young. Then, outside of the thought of money, I decided to do this. And then we started talking about, well, how was he happy with his decision to do it? He said, I am upset with the patient. Don't think I'm not upset. I had forgotten the issue of money. When we were getting ready for the surgery, the patient had said to me, Najib, we know that this money isn't much. And really, he says, 5 million tamans is nothing. This is human life. This 5 million tamans they've decided for the donor is really nothing. It should be at least 20 million. All these behaviors of like the family members of the patient are until the moment the person needs you. He needed me. First needed God, then me. I'm telling you of my sorrow. Before the operation, he pulled me aside and said, Oh, Majid, Mr. Majid, I know this isn't much money, and I know you have a wife and a kid. We will support you financially after this. Well, I wasn't thinking of the money at that point. He brought it up himself. So that next morning, we had the transplant. So then he talks about, he was almost in tears when he was explaining this part. I don't know how to describe the pain to you that a donor experiences. The recipient doesn't feel anything, true, but they have to be very careful, for example, not to have in contact with microbes and so on. But the pain that a donor feels, I take God as my witness. This pain, I compare it to the pain a woman undergoes during delivery. This is worse than that. I went through that process not long ago without an epidural, and I would say nothing can possibly compare to that. But this is just to say that he was, yes, he was very traumatized. This is worse than that. It's a lot worse, a lot worse. If you take it to the nth exponent, then you can maybe get close to what I'm saying. I think they break your rib in the process. For 3 days, I had the most intolerable pain. And I didn't want them to give me morphine so that they released me, and so that I could go home, and then the pain resumed, and it was unbearable. And I told you about the patient's father, that he would support me and all. But for 20 days, they didn't even call me and ask how I was doing. Finally, I called them to see how that young man was doing. But this was his duty. It's true that the patient needed the kidney, but the donor also did something big. I don't want to aggrandise what I did, but I did this to start my life again. I did this to help him. I didn't want him to lose his life, but I also expected that at least after 10-15 days the father could call. But this didn't happen, and this left a really bad memory for me. And at that time, my own family had shunned me. I had no one but my wife. And my wife, with teary eyes, she had tried to stop me, but I did this on my own. In the end, I did it for the patient. In my heart, I did it for him. And I was so sad that they didn't even ask how I was doing. And it's not just me. You see donors, and with their horrible condition, with all their pain, that even if they let out a single cough, can cause such pain around their stitches. And they just write them a check of $5 million and say goodbye, goodbye. The resentment I have towards the patient, that was the toughest part. You can't forget that. And I must add that I saw the patient 5-6 months after the operation. I saw him behind the shop window, and he was looking very well. When he was sick, you may not believe it, but he was maybe less than 55-60 kilos. When I saw him later, he was very well. He looked as if his weight had doubled. I was happy. But he didn't really acknowledge me. I mean, you gave up a part of your body. If it had been me, if I had received an organ, I would be thankful for years. I would visit them 20, 30 times a year. But our encounter was just that once, and it lasted maybe 3-4 minutes. That's it. He didn't even call. That was it, and now 2 years have passed. So I said, what would you say to someone like you wanting to sell a kidney? I would only warn him of the pain, the suffering after the pain, the limitations, for example, having to care for his body and the diet restrictions. But I wouldn't prevent it, because if someone like you stands in your presence and needs a new life, then you're affected by that, regardless of the financial issue. At that point, the financial issues don't come to mind. I mean, in this society these days, what is $5 million a month? Did you have a checkup after the surgery? I asked him, and he said that no, he didn't. I never pursued it. You should do it, but ever since my transplant, I didn't even have one checkup. Maybe this is because I don't even want to think about it or hear about it. Even a small piece of news about it puts you in deep thought. After the surgery, every little pain around the kidney area makes you think about your transplant. That's how you think about it. If you have a pain here, you say, oh, it's because I gave my kidney. So he was very depressed over the fact that maybe he had made a bad decision and he didn't want anyone to have to tell him that he would now have to face grave ramifications for this decision that he made. And now he's actually sick and maybe now he has to go and buy a kidney. I said, should kidney selling be prohibited like it is in the U.S.? No, that's not a good thought. We're all human. When that human connection is created between two people, you see that young person who needs you, you can't turn back on that. There's an emotional connection. There's an emotional feeling. So someone had offered him a job, but you see the amount is so little, it would be nice if someone in the state or someone wealthy covered that amount so he didn't have to sell. So he says, I wish that it was a situation where nobody was poor enough to have to sell, but you shouldn't really stop people from selling because to him, there was still something in that human connection that was being made, that was valuable, that should not be prevented. But he also thought that the amount that he was receiving was too little. It wasn't enough. And not only was it not enough for him to solve his problems, he was still very poor, but the person was also, on top of all of that, not sufficiently grateful. So really, what was there left for him? So perhaps if that person who gave him the kidney was also poor, couldn't afford to give him any more than the amount that they gave him, but at least was thankful that in his mind he could make sense of this phenomenon and say at least, fine, I am also still suffering, but I saved the life of another person. Just a few more snippets, and then I'm going to leave you with this to kind of make sense of this on your own, and email me your thoughts so that I can finish this chapter. Director of the KPF once said to me, the amount they pay is not the price of the kidney. Still, we do agree that buying and selling is happening. Money is being exchanged, but the money is not the price. A 20-year-old kidney recipient said, the seller truly is an altruist. The amount you pay really isn't the value of the kidney. The kidney is worth so much more. You realize that when you lose your kidneys, God will repay them for the sacrifice they make. Another female recipient said, I pray for my donor. I pray God will grant him all he needs in life. A person in his 30s who wanted to sell his kidney said, I don't want to make, he would say, God is my witness, I don't want to make any money out of this. He wanted 50 million from once for it. I don't want to make any money out of this. I'm willing to show exactly how much I'm in debt. All I want is for that amount to be paid. I want to regain my dignity, which he had lost because of his debt. I don't want anything more for myself. And another person who walked into the KPF and said that I want 20 million pounds for my kidney. And the staff told him, well, the amount is set for 6 million pounds. Said something that to me is extremely crucial when we think about a market for kidneys. He said, what do you mean the amount is 6 million? My problem can only be solved with 20 million. How dare you say it's 6 million, as if my body is chicken meat. So for you to set a set amount, for him was to set a price on it, was for him to say that your body is a commodity, is a thing, and I can set a market value for it, and you are not allowed to demand more. Whereas for him, this wasn't about his kidney. This wasn't about a value that he deserved because he was giving his kidney. He had a problem. He was going to save somebody's life. Somebody needed to save his life, help his problem, and for that, he would need nothing less than 20 million a month. So really the way that I think about this is that the way that these donors and recipients, and even those people who are proponents of this, would say that this isn't a case of people selling their kidneys, this is a people wanting to exchange solutions for their problems. One has a problem with health, one has a problem, a financial problem. And this exchange is facilitating that. I can't go over the rest of this, and I would just say that food for thought. Here, am I saying that therefore this should be permitted? No, not necessarily. Am I saying that this is a horrible thing and people are being exploited? I would say, from what you have seen, you have to be cautious. Say that is not necessarily what is happening. And if we are going to then, from this, try to think of what kinds of policies we can implement or change policies that exist in America or elsewhere in the world, I think that we have to get out of this discussion of people are autonomous agents, they can make decisions on their own, they can choose to be harmed by this or not harmed, or that the body can only be gifted because only gifting can be a moral kind of framework, a moral way of dealing with the body. Anytime money is exchanged, it's always a case of commodification, and commodification is always wrong. I would say that with these examples, and hopefully once I publish this, we will be able to challenge this and come up with a more nuanced rubric. Whether ultimately it prohibits or allows kidney selling, it will be something that will actually be closer to what people in practice might consider to be moral or efficacious, exploitative or not exploitative.